What's up everyone, my name is Danny Dignan, also known as Imaginate, and today I'm going to show you how to make a typical kind of dubstep growl, and the growl is going to sound a little something like this. So there you have it. This growl is pretty rich, a lot going on, a lot of effects and whatnot. There are four things in my mind that play a pretty big role in the character and tone of a growl noise. And these four things come down to waveform, filtering, warping and modulating, and finally movement. And movement kind of encompasses all three of those, but I like to keep it separate because it's a very, very important piece of the pie. So without further ado, let's dive right in. The first thing we're going to do when we're making this growl is we're going to start with our waveform, as I suggested earlier. And when it comes to choosing a waveform for a growl noise, you want to choose something that's got a lot of harmonic content, a lot of stuff going on, not too pure, but not too noisy, something nice in between. So I like to go to the spectral folder for the wavetables and choose something down usually from Monster to the Reese Mess area. Now, let's see. Let's choose Reese Mess 3. Let's audition that. Yeah, so something like that pretty much is what we want. Now, we've got our waveform figured out. Now let's find a good starting point, a good location on the oscillator to start with. So let's figure this out. So somewhere right here to about here is pretty good. I think that's where we're going to stay. So now, as I mentioned earlier, movement is a big part of making a growl noise. So to get there and to get some movement going right off the bat, we're going to apply an LFO. Now I'm just going to take LFO1 and make a wave shape such as this. Actually, let's do this. Let's do more of a shark fin kind of look, and then pull this over to about there. Get it pretty short. Cool. See what we got. So that's our wavetable position. I'll supply that movement. Oh, big thing to remember here. In Serum, it starts with the trigger and envelope, starting point option always off. So sometimes when you go to play your sound, it's going to start from a different position, not from the beginning. So in order to fix that, you can put it on trigger or envelope, but on trigger, every time you hit the note, it'll restart from pretty much zero. So no change. Cool, so now we've got some movement on our wavetable. Now let's move over to our modulation, or excuse me, our warp parameter. In other cases, it's a modulation, whatnot. In Serum, it's called the warp mode, or warp parameter. Cool, so now let's select a warp mode. That's kind of cool. Maybe a little too much going on. Let's cycle through these some more. I know the bend minus and bend plus warp modes can be pretty awesome. You can get some pretty cool stuff out of that. So yeah, as you can hear, I mean, we kind of already getting that growl texture. The formant kind of raw kind of thing. So that sounds pretty cool, but let's not just settle on one thing quite yet. Let's keep going. So that sounds equally as cool. Now, as you may have noticed, bend plus and bend minus are basically one is bending the waveform to the middle, and one is spreading it outward from the middle. So, as bend plus is going to do, as you can see, as you turn it up, it's going to push inward. Now if you do bend minus, it's pulling it outward and just stretching the waveform outward. So now let's move on and find something else. Let's cruise through these a little bit. Bend plus, bend minus is just going to cycle between being a bend plus and bend minus. But let's find something that can be really interesting. Now I find, here we go, yeah, I find this parameter, this warp mode, to be really interesting. You can get some really cool stuff out of it because you have the option of doing asymmetrical plus, asymmetrical minus. So let's play with this a little bit and see if we can find some cool tones. Yeah, that's pretty cool. So yeah, we're already really, getting more of a growl texture from that, or just growly kind of movement. So let's go with that. Now let's find a pretty good position to start with. I kind of like that. Let's go with that. Let's do this. Let's put this right here and then pop on an LFO there. Just go through this a little bit more so we can find some interesting movement. Oh, that sounds pretty cool. Let's do that. Let's stick with that. So there we go. We have some movement on our wavetable, and we have some warp modulation going on and some movement there. Now let's move on to filtering. So when it comes to filtering, you have a lot of options. You have your lows, you got your highs, you got your band pass, you got your peak, you got your notch, and then a whole slew of other things, which is really awesome. And I think one of the coolest things about Serum is just how many filter options you have. But I want to keep it simple today, and let's choose a band 12. Now, essentially, a band 12 is cutting off both the lows and the highs of a signal. So it's creating, as you can see, kind of like a hill shape here. And what's happening is all this right here is what's going to be mostly audible. And what's going to be interesting is if we turn up the resonance here and play with the cutoff. We're really starting to get more of that growly movement, a lot of yoy kind of stuff again, and that's the point behind the growls. You want to get stuff, you want to find movements such as this that are bringing out that characteristic. Cool. So we've got our filter on there. Now let's throw an LFO. Find some cool stuff. I find that putting an LFO on the cutoff parameter on a filter can get a little messy sometimes if you have the difference, or excuse me, the distance between where it stops and starts. Things can get pretty messy if you have extremities like that. So subtle movements, or like a subtle LFO time, I guess, or distance is what I should say. Same thing on the wavetable and the warp area as well. Subtle things is kind of better sometimes, because you want to keep things cohesive and not too all over the place. Things can get a little messy sometimes. Anyway, so I've said messy enough. Now let's audition this. Yeah, so that sounds pretty cool. Yeah, I'm taking it down a little bit. Turn on the resonance a little bit. Yeah, so that sounds pretty cool. So yeah, as you can hear, actually, excuse me, let's turn up the drive a little bit. Yeah, just a little bit. Yeah, so as you can hear, we've got that growly characteristic coming out even more. A lot of interesting movement going on, and we're pretty much good here in the oscillator tab. So let's move on to effects, and this is where things are going to get really interesting. All right, so I'm going to move on to the effects tab, and the first thing that I always do is go for the compressor and turn on the multiband option. And the reason for this is because this is really going to bring out the sound even more, make it much more alive in a way. So let's turn down the threshold a bit, quite a bit, and just to be safe, we're going to turn on our master to about, I don't know, 60%, just something so that we're not clipping. Cool, so that sounds pretty good. Let's turn up the master a little bit, we can get a little bit louder. Cool. All right. Let's put the threshold a little bit more. Don't want it to sound overly compressed, not too squashed. Just something that's, you know, alive. Cool. So yeah, that sounds pretty good. Maybe turn up the gain just a little bit. I know I could probably be doing this with the master, but I'm gonna try with the gain. Cool. Yes, we'll just leave it at that. The gain's pretty subtle. Don't really need to use it too much, just if you want to turn things up without having to trump the master, which can be super handy. All right, so the next thing I'm going to do is go to the top of our effects options and go to hyperdimension. This is another amazing effect type in Serum. It really brings out the sound even more, makes it more present, more just richer and more exciting. So definitely reach for hyper almost every time after I use the compressor. So anyway, we're gonna go to our hyper area and turn up the mix. Yeah, so as you can see, or as you can hear, we've got some phasing going on, like a phaser effect in a way, maybe some flanging, some detune, you know, lots of things are going on here. Turn it up even more maybe. That sounds pretty cool. Now if we want to add some stuff on the sides, some peripherals, we can turn up the dimension a little bit. Yeah, that sounds pretty cool. Maybe we'll kick it back a little bit. Don't wanna overdo it. Cool. So now we've got our hyperdimension sorted out. Now let's move on to distortion. And let's see, yeah. Cool, so now we're gonna cycle through distortion and find something that's pretty interesting. Tube is pretty cool, but I'm gonna go with the diode 2. I like to use diode 2 quite a bit. Diode 1's pretty cool, but I find that diode 2 has better results for kind of what I'm going for most of the time, and it's just a really, really well done distortion mode here in Serum. So let's turn on the mix a little bit, and then we'll just inch our way more to 100% until we find something that we really like. And we'll turn up the drive just a little bit too, maybe 15%. Cool, so that is at, what, 18%? So let's move it up to, let's go extreme. Maybe not that much, just kick it back. Yeah, so maybe about right there. Yeah, that sounds pretty good. Now let's hear it without it. A little dull compared to what we just heard with the distortion on. Still cool nonetheless, but with distortion. Here's without. Here's with. Thicker, richer, more harmonics, subtle stuff. Sounds good. Cool. So let's move on. Now let's go to our EQ. Now the EQ is going to be another super, super, super important tool when it comes to getting that growl characteristic. The reason being is because an EQ is essentially a filter, and vice versa. So instead of using an EQ as like a fix-it-all kind of tool, or well, not a fix-it-all tool, but you know, a tool or a technical kind of tool, we can use it in a creative way, and you can get some really cool stuff out of using this as a corrective tool in your toolbox. So we're gonna make 2 Pique envelopes here, or excuse me, two Pique filters in a way, and we're gonna turn them up just a bit, just to start with. Excuse me, we're gonna turn up this one first, and then we're gonna turn down this one a little bit, and I'll explain that in a minute. So now let's throw LFO 1 on both of these, and we're gonna put one going left and then one going right. So basically just opposite directions from each other. And let's just play it. Let's hear what it sounds like. Cool, so now that's what we have with the EQ applied. Now let's take it off and hear what it sounded like before this. Pretty cool, again, but with the EQ on, just a little bit more movement, a little bit more interest. So that sounds pretty cool, but let's move on. Let's try something a little different. Let's play with the frequency knob a little bit and the distance between 0 and 100 from the LFO. See if we can find that sweet spot. Turn this up a little bit. Should turn the gain up a little bit, turn the Q. Maybe a little bit more. Let's see. Just gonna play around a little bit, try to find that sweet spot. There we go. Yeah. Turn up the gain a little bit. Cool. Yeah, so now we've got a little bit more going on. Found that sweet spot to get that lower kind of growl noise out a little bit. And then we also applied an LFO on the second frequency modulator. And the reason for this is that we could add some extra movement as well. And in this case, we did another bell curve, but instead of making it a peak and boosting frequencies that are swept from the distance, or from the distance from 0 to 100 from the LFO, instead we're taking away stuff, so it's sweeping through and cutting out frequencies as the LFO does its cycle. So we get more of a kind of a wetter, like a wet kind of neuro-y kind of sound, and I like doing that a lot for growls because it keeps things a little bit more interesting, and I just personally really like the sound of like a wet kind of bass, really flowy, watery kind of stuff, and that can be achieved through a notch filter, which is essentially what it is. You can hear that notching going on quite a bit. Now if I get rid of it, still sounds pretty wet, and that's mostly from the hyper stuff and the subtle detuning and whatnot. But if we pull this down and do this, let's see, pull this down quite a bit. I'm gonna do an extreme just to show you, so you can hear that that upper frequency sweep. That's kind of what's going on there. At an extreme level, of course. But now we're going to do this. We're going to pull this gain back up a little bit. And maybe mess with the Q a little bit. And maybe the frequency a little bit, just to fine-tune things a little bit. yeah, so that sounds pretty cool. Very subtle notching, subtle peak to give more of that growl, low growl characteristic, and that's all we'll really do with our EQ. Now this is where things are going to get pretty fun. We're going to start applying some stuff that's just going to add on to what we have subtly, though. Nothing too big, no major change. Just something that's going to make that growl characteristic come out more and make it sound really cool. Phaser is really fun because you can turn down the rate, so meaning there won't be like a shift or anything like that. It'll just be one frequency all the time from the LFO. It'll be just the LFO shifting through the frequency. It won't be the rate of the phaser doing anything. Now let's turn on the mix a little bit. We don't want too much of a difference from the original sound. Let's go to our frequency, put the LFO on that, and we're going to kick this back quite a bit. We're going to go somewhere around maybe, yeah, start at 80. Kind of where that low growl is going to be. And that's what we're really going to want to bring out, as well as add on a little bit of more shifting through the higher stuff, maybe the low mids and the high mids and whatnot. We'll shift through that a little bit as well. So here we go. Let's check this out. Maybe turn up the mix a little bit. Cool, yeah, so you can kind of hear the phasing going on already. That's pretty extreme. So we're going to turn this down a little bit, and we're going to go to frequency and kick this back maybe to about, I'd say that's probably about maybe 300 or so, but we're just going to keep it very subtle. So that's done. We're done with the phaser now. Let's move on to, I don't know, not flanging so much. Let's do the reverb. This can be kind of cool. Let's see. Now let's turn down this a bit. Let's leave it on Hall. Let's turn the low cut up. We don't want any low stuff going on there. Maybe the high cut. Turn that down a little bit. And the decay pretty close. Maybe a little bit of reverb size. Let's audition this. Cool, so that's pretty cool. Maybe a little too much reverb. Let's turn down the mix a bit. Cool, yeah, that sounds pretty dope. So we have our main sound right in front, and then we've got this very, very subtle quick decay reverb on the sides just to give it a little bit more characteristics, some more dimension, some depth. Pretty neat. Cool, so now we're done with the reverb. Now let's move on to the filter, which is almost where we are done with this. We are getting close to our final product. Now, the filter here, actually before I get into it, the filter here can totally be optional. I like to add it just to, add some other stuff. You can do some post-processing stuff, really whatever you want. I seriously encourage experimentation. But the filter in Serum has some certain things about it that make it very interesting and make Serum have that much more character. Like these filters are only in Serum, which gives Serum, kind of the edge a little bit. So I'm gonna play with some of these filters a little bit. Let's see. The go-to, I'll be honest, the go-to for most of it is most of this growly kind of stuff is a reverb filter, and let's hear why. So now it's kind of got a reverb effect a little bit. I mean, the filter is called reverb, so obviously, but it's super subtle. And what it's really doing is the reverb filter has got these very small notches, very skinny, kind of deep notches, as well as some thicker short ones, some in between. It's just it's a slew of different kind of notches, different shapes, different sizes, whatever. So because of that, it's having a substantial effect on the sound itself. The further you go, the further you pull the cutoff down. So let's start at 0. Let's turn the reverb off just so I can show you this. So that's like, you know, basically reverb. Now turn the reverb back on, maybe kick back a little bit. And turn the cut off a bit. Turn it off, or excuse me, turn it up. Cool. It's too much. Turn the mix down. We want our main sound in the front. Cool. That sounds pretty cool. So now the reverb filter is applied, and it's adding a little bit of peripherals, so making the growl a little bit more interesting. Now the final thing to do, and the reason why I make this final, is because of possible phase issues, and maybe not a totally accurate representation of what I'm hearing if I were to do this before the effects tab, and that is adding some unison and detuning our sound. I always keep it at one voice, which is, you know, dead mono, almost 100% way, or 100% through the process of making a growl. Now, since we've got our effects tab figured out, we're going to add some voices, and then we're going to add a little bit of detune. So let's start with 5 voices first. That's pretty cool. The detune, or excuse me, the unison, you know, adds more voices, so there's going to be some more characteristic going on, and it's, yeah, just making things a little bit richer. Now let's turn the detune up ever so slightly. Maybe a little bit too much. Kick it back. That sounds pretty cool. Maybe we'll fix this a little bit. We'll just play around. That sounds cool. Yeah, so there you have it. That is pretty much it. I hope you enjoyed. My name is Imaginate. I've got some new music that I'm working on right now. I'll also be having a sample pack out at some point in the future. Looking forward to that. And if you have anything to say, any questions, make sure to comment below. And like and subscribe. Hope you guys like. We'll see you soon.
If you're a music producer, subscribe to our channel and stay up to date on the latest Pyramind tutorial videos, track breakdowns, elite sessions, and more. Visit us at pyramind.com.